Welcome to Crossroads, a show by the Epoch Times, one of America's largest independent newspapers that brings you insights beyond the headlines. Now, if you haven't yet, make sure to hit the like button, leave a comment, let me know what you think of the show, and please don't forget to subscribe. You get updates on when the next show is. We do it again 4 times a week, new stuff coming, so please don't forget. Now, look, some big stuff happening. President Donald Trump is inching towards putting Washington, D.C. completely under federal control. The first step of it, National Guard's troops are now being deployed to help secure the streets against crime. The police department of Washington, D.C. is now under federal control. And the move on this was announced by President Trump, who has now invoked the Home Rule Act of 1973, which I'll get into that in a bit and what that exactly is. And this is an action, he says, is meant to make Washington, D.C., quote-unquote, safe and beautiful. Now, here's Trump announcing the move during a press conference yesterday. Watch.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that. Very good people, but they're tough, and they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly.
So Washington, D.C. has been liberated, and Trump says he now wants to take back the Capitol. And look, the narrative for this is very high crime in Washington. And there are reports of teenage gangs going around stealing people's cards, robbing people at gunpoint, and allegedly facing little or no punishment, basically let off the hook whenever they do it. And if you have kids being able to commit crimes without consequence, well, what happens? They're not afraid to do it in broad daylight, and that's one of the problems. Now, because of this, also because of homelessness and other issues, well, Trump's doing what he says he's doing. Now, to get more into this, I want to show you first what Trump is actually invoking. This is the actual law that he's invoking. This is the D.C. Home Rule, and this is from the Council of the District of Columbia, right? Talking about the Home Rule Act. It says the Home Rule Act is the result of the ongoing push by district residents for control of their own local affairs. Remember, this goes back to the 70s, right? This is not a new thing. Trump is just invoking it. It says the existing local government is the most expanded form of self-government since the establishment of the district as the seat of the federal government. In 1790, when the 1790, in the original establishment of D.C., right? It says, when they first took it. In 1790, when the district was established on land ceded by Maryland and Virginia to the federal government, only about 3,000 citizens lived in the area, far less than the 50,000 required to be a state. The people living in the federal district continued to vote in Maryland and Virginia, respectively. And anybody's been to Washington, D.C., a lot of people still live in Maryland or Virginia. The narrative here is that effectively, if you create a federal region where the people living there are like government employees for the most part, should you have them be able to vote and have congressional representation as if they were a state? How do you balance that? That was the big question, right? Now, notes further in that citizens embraced the new home rule government as more representative of the local citizenry and more responsive to their needs. The powers and duties of the council are comparable to those held by state, county, and city legislatures, including the authority to adopt laws and to approve the district's annual budget submitted by the mayor. As the legislature, the council, which works basically as that, is a co-equal branch of government and is part of a system of checks and balances similar to any other state government. When the office of mayor is vacant, the chairman of the council becomes the acting mayor. Under the home rule government, however, Congress reviews all legislation passed by the council before it can become law and retains authority over the district's budget. Also, it says the president appoints the district's judges, and the district still has no voting representation in Congress. That's going to be one of the more controversial points. We'll get into it. It says this as well. Because of these and other limitations on local government, citizens continue to lobby for the authority held by all 50 states. Basically, what's happening is this. Trump invoking the Home Rule Act invokes that system of government for Washington, D.C. Basically, it makes Washington, D.C. under federal control. Now, what does that actually mean, according to the document we just read? Well, what this does, it makes Washington, D.C. different from other cities across the nation to an extent. The citizens, they elect a council. The council works similar to a legislative branch. Think of a city council, right? The mayor, who they also elect, plays a similar role as well. What's different is this. Congress, as in the federal government, gets to review legislation from the council before it becomes law. So that small area cannot just create laws on its own. Congress gets to be kind of the final vote on what actually gets passed because, again, it's a federal district. And also gets authority over the budget. So Congress gets to decide how the budget is managed. Now, you could say part of that is because, a lot of the spending there would be federal, because it's federal buildings and federal beauty and federal monuments and so on. As it mentions also, the district judges are appointed by the President of the United States. And the district also does not get to vote for representation in Congress. It's going to be interesting, actually, in terms of the judges, because Washington, D.C., when they convened grand jury indictments against Trump in Florida, they did it through D.C. Legally, I don't know how they ever managed to do that because you normally cannot convene a grand jury for prosecution in another state. The whole reason they did that, come to your own conclusions on why they would do that. Trump has been arguing that he could not get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. Basically, it's a hyper-partisan district. It votes very far left, right? Very much Democrat, very solid blue state or city. Now, what this would mean effectively is the President, Donald J. Trump, would then get to decide who the judges are for Washington, D.C., and Congress would get to vote on any legislation for Washington, D.C. And remember, Republicans currently hold both seats at both houses of Congress and are taking moves right now, redistricting and redoing the census. They will probably solidify their control of Congress, meaning Washington, D.C. will effectively be handed from Democrat control to Republican control. Although you could argue it's not really partisan. Come on, yeah, it is, right? Especially if you put it under federal control. Now, in terms of crime, U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Jeanine Pirro, she gave some statements on the situation of crime in Washington, D.C. This was during an announcement on what will change with all of this and what it's going to mean for Washington. Now this move is being taken. Watch this.
I see too much violent crime being committed by young punks who think that they can get together in gangs and crews and beat the hell out of you or anyone else. They don't care where they are. They can be in DuPont Circle, but they know that we can't touch them. Why? Because the laws are weak. I can't touch you if you're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old and you have a gun. I convict someone of shooting another person with an illegal gun on a public bus in the chest. Intent to kill? I convict him. And you know what the judge gives him? Probation. Says you should go to college. We need to go after the D.C. Council and their absurd laws. We need to get rid of this concept of, no cash bail. We need to recognize that the people who matter are the law-abiding citizens. And it starts today. But it's not going to end today because the president is going to do everything we need to do to make sure that these emboldened criminals understand we see you, we're watching you, and we're going to change the law to catch you. And my final note is this. These kids understand that the jurisdiction is through the state attorney general, Brian Schwab. I did a poster of the young man from Doge who was beaten bloody with a severe concussion, a broken nose. And then I did a poster of what happens to those kids, because I can't arrest them, I can't prosecute them. They go to family court and they get to do yoga and arts and crafts. Enough. It changes today. Thank you.
Now, as she noted, the recent move to federalize D.C., it was triggered by the recent attack on the former Doge employee, the one who went by the nickname Big Balls. He was severely beaten by a couple urban youth for trying to stop them. They were allegedly trying to carjack a woman. He intervened and they savagely beat him. Now, on that point also, we still don't know the full story on that. There's a bloody photo of him going around, laying, sitting on the sidewalk, and doesn't look very good. But that was used as the kind of kickoff for this whole thing. Now, with that said, though, there's a bit more to it. This was already in the works, even without that attack taking place. That attack was the trigger. It was already loaded, effectively. Trump was already moving on this exact program, even before the recent attack on the former Doge staffer. Now, this goes back to an executive order that Trump signed on March 28th. This is what he actually aims to do. He already took action to do this. You're just seeing it being carried out on the ground now because there was, the incident that allowed them to do it on the surface. This is what Trump wrote in May, right? In March 28th. He said this: "My administration shall work closely with local officials to share information, develop joint priorities, and maximize resources to make the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., safe. Such coordination shall occur through the D.C. Safe and Beautiful Task Force," the task force, "which is hereby established by this order." It says the task force shall be chaired by the Assistant to the President, Homeland Security Advisor, or his designee, and shall otherwise include representatives from the following departments, agencies, or components selected as such. Department, agency, or component determines. These are all the departments or agencies that are now involved in this council that's going to be overseeing the safety in Washington. The Department of the Interior, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the United States Marshals Service, federal marshals, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, right? ATF, meaning probably going after gun laws. The United States Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia, that's Janine Pirro. And the United States Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland, the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia, and it notes the chairman of the task force may also select other departments, agencies, or components to participate as he deems necessary, meaning all those agencies, all those departments, all involved with the ability to basically bring in other ones at their own discretion. It's pretty big, in other words. It notes this as well. Representatives of such other departments, agencies, or components shall be selected as such department, agency, or component determines, meaning it's up to them. They can kind of do what they want. It's already big. They can expand it on their own discretion. Now, this is pretty broad. Basically, here's what it's going to do. It's going to let this task force, which is already big and able to expand basically at its own discretion, they can request operational assistance from other law enforcement agencies. Think ICE, for example, which is going to be a big thing here. They don't name it on there. They're almost without a doubt going to do it. They can call in the National Guard because, again, they can call in other groups or agencies or, law enforcement, even potentially National Guard, which they're doing now. And it also directs this, quote, "maximum enforcement of federal immigration law and redirecting available federal, state, or local law enforcement resources to apprehend and deport illegal aliens in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area," end quote. That's the exact quote. So aside from going after crime and so on, they're going to have a massive purge, effectively, of illegal immigrants. They're going to be deporting them. They're also going to put systems in place to monitor the sanctuary city policies, give more research to forensics for solving crimes, put changes in place to make sure criminals are put in pretrial detention to the maximum extent, it says, of the law, and a lot more. Basically, this will put in a very, very strict police system that goes against both criminals and against illegal immigrants. It's like it's a very non-lenient law enforcement operation. They will charge you to the fullest extent of the law. They will do everything to the maximum extent possible, and they're overriding all of the existing, laws, regulations, local law enforcement, now under federal control. They're overriding all of that, and they're putting new laws in place, new rules in place. You're going to see, again, everything done to the maximum extent in terms of how they handle everything when it comes to crime or illegal immigrant in Washington, D.C. It also, alongside that, includes a program to make Washington, D.C., quote-unquote, beautiful. And this includes moves to restore monuments, statues, other landmarks. They're going to be doing a lot of fixing and a lot of repainting and remodeling and that kind of stuff. It includes programs to remove graffiti, and you've seen a lot of that, of course. It includes, quote, proposals to ensure federal buildings or lands adequately uplift and beautify public spaces and generate in the citizenry pride and respect for our nation. So every monument, everything they put there, every piece of art will have to inspire some kind of pride in and respect for the United States. No more probably things trying to demonize America, no more art exhibits, talking about how bad and evil the Pilgrims were or something like that. All of that's going to be coming to an end if they do it. It also includes programs to keep the city clean, to encourage private sector participation, because remember, not everything there is owned by the government. You have a lot of private businesses. They're going to have things to help them participate in the beautification of Washington, D.C. and keeping it clean. There's going to be other programs also along those lines. Now, as you might imagine, not everybody is happy about this. In fact, I'd say some are very, very unhappy about it. And this is also sparking some discussions of the actual state of crime in the city. Many news outlets are talking about, is it really as bad as Trump says it is? Well, I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. If you're enjoying the show, support us by hitting that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel. You get updates on when the next show is, and you help us grow. This helps get the show out to more people. Now, look, President Trump, he's moved to put Washington, D.C., the police department under federal control, and he's going to be deploying the National Guard, all of the troops from the state to help secure the streets and make D.C. safe and beautiful. It's going to be beautifully secured by the Army, well, the National Guard, right? Now, look, not everybody is happy about this. Some people are very, very not happy about it. And it's sparking some discussions on the actual state of crime in Washington, D.C. Let me show you what some people are saying. The Washington Post has this. They say violent crime in D.C. has been on the decline since 2023. not that long ago, when a generational spike in killings rendered the nation's capital one of America's deadliest cities. You know, a slight drop in crime from a spike that made a place the deadliest place in the country and one of the deadliest cities in the entire world, at least, nation capitals, that's still not very good. But they're arguing it's an improvement, right? And they said it plunged the communities into grief and igniting a local political crisis that escalated to Congress. Go, lo and behold, right? Now, here's a quote from somebody they interviewed. They said, quote, "This is a safe city, but overhearing and witnessing gang threats and then watching the camera footage of the thuggery is disturbing." So it's safe, but hearing threats from gangs and watching footage of thuggery is disturbing, but it's safe, said one resident. It says, speaking on the condition of anonymity over concerns of their personal safety. So it's safe, right? The exact quote, "This is a safe city," but they had to speak on condition of anonymity for concerns of personal safety. Something doesn't line up here, right? That's like the square piece trying to go in the round hole. It doesn't quite line up. I don't know. Something doesn't line up. It says the crowd of teens, he said, were roaming the street and appeared to be checking for unlocked cars and things to steal. Now, I guess you're safe if you don't try to stop them. Maybe you're safe if you don't give your name so they can find you. We don't know. But they said this as well, quote, "The language Trump uses to describe D.C. is wrong," he said, "but clearly there is something bad going on that needs to stop." So maybe somewhere in the middle, right? Now, look, on that point, critics did note the odd language. Everything's fine, but people need to speak under condition of anonymity because they fear for their safety and they may be hunted if they give their names. And the other problem is that crime is not just the murder rate. Many people have been posting statistics, Trump's been talking about it, showing global crime rates of national capitals. Washington, D.C. is worse than some of the most violent countries in the world in terms of murder rate for a national capital. Now, they say it's gotten better since 2023 when there was a spike, but that's not that much better, to be honest. The other issue is the problems of robberies and carjackings and so on. They're becoming a big problem. They're happening in broad daylight. It's also being made worse because a lot of critics argue not enough is being done to actually stop it from happening or from growing. Again, you have people acting with impunity. They're not really being held to the law. And you see narratives like this all across the country. In Cincinnati, where there was a white man and white woman beaten by a fairly large group of individuals, the local government there is saying the individuals, the man and woman, should be arrested because they instigated people to beat them. The allegation, I guess, is they said a racist word, and a group of people attacked them, beat them on the ground, severely beat a woman, and they think it's okay for some reason. They think that the people who were beaten are the ones who should be arrested, not the people who beat them. That's kind of one of the interpretations of law going around right now, that crime is somehow justified and that the victims are, in fact, the perpetrators. Another key issue here, there's concern among Democrats. This is actually part of something bigger, though. Some are arguing this is not really about crime at all. Some of them are saying this is part of a broader move by Trump to basically federalize law enforcement. Now, some are pointing to his actions deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles to protect ICE agents. Remember what was happening in Los Angeles? ICE agents, federal law enforcement, they were carrying out deportation efforts. There were groups, even government employees, reporting the locations of ICE agents. They would then, communicate this to different groups. Activist organizations would go there, block ICE from doing its job. The police in Los Angeles are forbidden because of sanctuary laws. They can be charged criminally for it. They're not even allowed to help protect ICE if, again, they get reported and a group of people organized goes there and maybe attacks ICE or blocks them. And so what happens, while ICE was being blocked from doing its job, Trump then deploys National Guard to guard federal agents, and you are where you're at now, right? He also did that to help put down the riots where people were burning cars and throwing stones at police, and people have now been arrested for that. Some are arguing that Trump instigated that, that of course the deployment of the National Guard is what caused the riots. It could go either way you want with it, right? Basically, people were already acting with impunity against ICE agents. But again, believe which side you want. The riots did start afterwards more heavily because of some of the local criticisms. Now, Trump has discussed taking actions like that elsewhere, though. So what we can say, they're kind of right. Trump is carrying out efforts to federalize law enforcement. He's using the National Guard. And he's already talking about replicating what they're doing in Washington, D.C. to 5 other states right now. We could see similar actions to this being done elsewhere. Trump is already saying he might do it. And already we're seeing it in Los Angeles and now in Washington, D.C. Now, on Trump's side, he's saying this is necessary. He's saying states and cities are not doing enough themselves to protect the American people from crime. He's saying they're effectively allowing it to happen. They're not doing anything, especially about youth crime, where people under the age of 18 face much lighter punishment to the extent that they don't really care about getting arrested. And you also see issues where people are allowed to beat people, attack people, rob people. And if it's framed under race narratives, the victim is often the perpetrator, and people who are ironically victims end up being the ones who have their lives destroyed. Take Cincinnati, for example. Trump is saying that's coming to an end. There's a lot of pushback on that. There's also something bigger taking place, though. When it comes to Washington, D.C., there's actually kind of like a meta-narrative. There's a bigger picture issue, and this is the political battle for Washington, D.C. Now, many are talking about kind of the granular level. Trump deploying the National Guard, Trump federalizing law enforcement, Trump doing this and that. There's a larger partisan battle for what Washington, D.C. actually is. And this has been an ongoing debate over what role Washington should actually play in politics. We'll start with the Democrats. The Democrats, they want Washington, D.C. to become its own state. They want it to have statehood. Now, Trump kind of threw a wrench into that whole system. The narrative for a long time between right and left in this country, Democrat, Republican, Democrats said Washington, D.C. should be a state. Republicans were basically saying, no, it shouldn't. Trump took the bar of the debate and did this to it. He said not only should it not be a state, but we should federalize it. Nobody was really saying that before Trump. Trump's pushing to have it become a federally controlled district. He kind of just did that. And that debate about whether it should be a state or not, or even a federal district, which Trump has now done, it was not just about crime. It was actually about congressional representation. The argument was this: if they were to make Washington, D.C. a state, give it statehood, what does that mean? It means they would have an additional Senate seat, and they would also have additional seats in the House of Representatives. And given the fact that Washington, D.C. is very solid blue, very Democrat, it would hand Democrats basically an additional seat in at least one seat in both houses of Congress, right? We'd have to see how they would do it in terms of the House, but it would have given them more congressional power. Trump just overturned that completely. Now, we'll see if what Trump did holds up, because I don't think anybody really saw this coming. Trump kind of came out of left field when he first suggested making Washington, D.C. a federally controlled district. Nobody was really talking about that before, but Trump has now basically done it. He's now done what he said and that people thought was crazy. So Washington, D.C. is now very much on its way to becoming a federally controlled district, and Trump has already invoked the Home Act on that to make that effective. Now look, in addition to all of this, right, with the issue of federalizing a city and sending National Guard troops to help put down riots, it's also being framed by some as part of a broader picture. Some are saying this is not just one tiny little isolated incident. Some are saying this is a bigger picture of what Trump represents. Some are also saying the issues of the economy are working in similar ways. Federal control of the economy. And some analysts are questioning whether political intervention in the economy represents a type of state capitalism. What is state capitalism? The term for it actually goes back to Vladimir Lenin, who after the Bolshevik Revolution wrote an article because people said, oh great, we're going to have communism now. And Vladimir Lenin said, no, you're going to have socialism. Socialism meaning we're going to control it. We're not going to abolish the state, right? And so Vladimir Lenin put in place what he called the system of state capitalist monopoly, state capitalism, which is what socialism is. Basically, state capitalism is when the government takes control of the businesses. Socialism, right? Some would refer to that also as a type of socialist state interventionism. Is America becoming that now with federal intervention in the economy? I don't think so, but let me explain what actually we're living under, what kind of government we actually have when it comes to the economy, right? Let's start with the accusations. The Wall Street Journal said this. It said a generation ago, conventional wisdom held that as China liberalized, opening up, right, its economy would come to resemble America's. Instead, capitalism in America is starting to look like China, meaning state capitalism. The state controls the businesses. The state controls the systems of capitalism, meaning socialism. It says this. Recent examples include President Trump's demand that Intel's chief executive resign, the 15% of certain chip sales to China that NVIDIA and Advanced Micro Devices will share with Washington, the golden share Washington will get in U.S. steel as a condition of Nippon Steel's takeover, and the $1.5 trillion of promised investment from trading partners Trump plans to personally direct. They say, quote, this isn't socialism in which the state owns the means of production. It is more like state capitalism, a hybrid between socialism and capitalism in which the state guides the decisions of nominally private enterprises. Further, when it states the federal government has often waded into the corporate world, it commandeered production during World War II, and under the Defense Production Act, emergencies such as the COVID-19 pandemic. It bailed out banks and car companies during the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis. Those, however, were temporary expedients, some of which stayed in place. And notes that former President Joe Biden went further, seeking to shape the actual structure of industry. His Inflation Reduction Act authorized $400 billion in clean energy loans. The CHIPS and Science Act earmarked $39 billion in subsidies for domestic semiconductor manufacturing. That, it says, of that $8.5 billion went to Intel, giving Trump leverage to demand the removal of its CEO over past ties to China. It notes that Intel so far has refused. What is really going on? I'd state first my one criticism of that analysis. The points they make about Trump are all about foreign diplomacy. The points they make about Trump are all about foreign trade deals and foreign influence. All the issues they compare that to are internal. Now, I would say the internal policies, manipulating the internal workings of the economy, state subsidies, political control over industry, yes, all of that is state capitalism. It's true. All of the policies, subsidies, interventionist policies, all of that does in fact represent various degrees of state capitalism. So yes, all the other examples they note are in fact state capitalism. The massive legislation of businesses, the red tape, many people would compare that to what they call a mixed model economy, meaning it's a mix of capitalism and socialism. America does not have true capitalism, we have crony capitalism. That is what it's referring to. That is 100% accurate. For a long time, mass regulations, mass controls, subsidies, state interventionism has in fact transformed us from being a capitalist society to a state capitalist society. We're effectively living under like minor socialism. But the accusations that what Trump is doing represents federal takeover are different. Again, because what it's referring to, all the examples are about external trade deals. That's one of the foundational jobs of the federal government. Let me explain, right? It basically notes that political intervention in the free market is changing the nature of the free market, that we don't have a true free market if the government is dictating it. I'd say this is not a new issue. This has been a long-running, very big problem. I don't agree with it. I think state interventionism will destroy a free market. I'd say that issue is not new by any means. I'd say it goes back to at least the early 1900s when it became really bad. It's the problem of what they call crony capitalism, state interventionism, or again, a mixed model economy. Ludwig von Mises, you can read his book, Socialism. You can also read his book, Planned Chaos, about that. Look, not to become too like hyper-partisan, but the lighter end of state interventionism, the Nazis were closer to what China is right now in terms of how they modeled their economies. Not a full control of it where everything's under the military. The CCP originally was like that, so was the Soviet Union. It's a mixed model economy, which is, look, nobody studies the actual context of what these words mean anymore, but that was actually what National Socialism was. It was a mixed model economy. The government basically assigned people to control the industries, and they controlled the industries through heavy regulation and through, again, basically they would assign the heads of companies. They referred to them as shopkeepers. We haven't gone that far, but to a large extent, we have a very similar economy. We have for a very long time. Now, the other issue here is about whether what Trump is doing is actually that. Is what Trump is doing state capitalism? This is what I would say to that argument. I'd say the analysis is conflating a few different issues. They're using an example on this side that is not the same as the example on the other side. For example, the question of whether Trump can demand the head of NVIDIA to step down because of the CEO's alleged ties to the Chinese Communist Party. What Trump is alleging is there's foreign influence in the American market. What he is alleging is that another country is influencing the private businesses of the United States. In other words, he's alleging there is foreign state interventionism in America. Now, if you have another country engaging in state interventionism and the other country is effectively creating a socialist policy to control an American business, that means that they're trying to extend their socialist state into our country. The President of the United States should be the one to stop that, because one of the few roles of the President in the original writings of the American system was to prevent that type of foreign influence and foreign control from taking hold over our markets and over the free market capitalism that we enjoy. Then there's also the question of whether the president intervening in international trade deals or using tariffs, does that represent a type of state socialism? Again, I would say it's conflating two issues. They're confusing internal policy and internal trade policy with external trade policy. External balancing trade deals is not state capitalism. It is made to prevent state capitalism from other countries from controlling American businesses. Now, personally, again, I'd say, at least for the most part, this is also a misrepresentation they're making. Negotiating international trade deals, setting global tariffs, that's something that predates socialism. Again, external versus internal. And that is actually one of the very few original roles of the federal government. This is one of the things the federal government is supposed to do. In fact, that is the reason why the United States went from being a confederacy, because in the original establishment of the United States, it was a confederacy. The problem you had is that the governments of Europe were ripping off states because they were bigger and they could do it. When the Founding Fathers came together, reconvened and made arguments for federalism, and you had the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, it was because of bad trade deals where Europe was effectively looking to destroy the economies of the states. The states did not have proper representation diplomatically or on the business side to make business deals that would prevent that from happening. Foreign countries were effectively trying to control and ruin the markets of America. That was why they created the federal government. That was the actual reason we created the federal government. And so, no, that does not represent state socialism if you're making those types of diplomatic negotiations. It also ties into the issue of how we should prevent foreign communist or state capitalist regimes from using state subsidies or insider interests to undermine the free economies of other countries. A big problem we have is other countries establish trade barriers. China does it, Europe was doing it, Canada does it. What they do effectively, they subsidize their industries, they tariff our companies, they defeat us in the markets, they grow them, they want to trade with us, and then they use state-subsidized businesses to undercut you on the market, put you out of business, and establish then what is basically a global monopoly. How do you stop that from happening? Conquest does not just happen through militaries. The conquering of another country is not just foreign invasion. You can control a country by controlling the markets. If you control the markets, you control the money, the GDP. If you control the GDP, you control the unions. If you control the unions, you control the politicians. And so how do you stop that from happening? Well, you make balanced trade deals. If they put barriers in place, you use tariffs to offset those barriers. That was the way we used to do it as a country up until the early 1900s. That was what America used to do. That was actually how we used to pay for the government, in fact. And so that in no way is state capitalism. That in no way it represents what they're saying it is. Now, look, of course, with that said, I would actually say, yes, we do live in a mixed model economy. I don't think it's good. I disagree with state interventionism. I think they're bad. I think it makes unhealthy, unnatural economies. I think a proper, healthy economy reflects the demands of the American people or the public of whatever country it is. I think the natural supply and demand and competition is part of what establishes a functioning, normal economy based on what actually works and lets the things that don't work fail and go out of business. Now, the other side is we also have a problem of monopoly. Government does have to intervene to prevent monopolies from growing to the extent that they crush the free market. There has to be something in place to maintain a free market where you have opportunity. If you have businesses crushing the opportunities of competitors, that also represents a type of tyranny. And I disagree with tyranny, whether from, again, corporate monopoly or from mass, government policy. Both of these should be undesirable. Unfortunately, we do right now live in a what you would call a mixed model economy, a socialism light, you would call it, right? What again would represent state interventionism and to an extent state capitalism, policies where effectively businesses are regulated by the government, if not fully controlled, regulated by high taxation and mass law. The red tape, all the walls and everything they have to go through, the barriers, the huge books of legal issues where you have to have an entire compliance department to not go to jail if you want to start a business, and the ability of, again, state capitalist supported corporations getting state subsidies that are able to basically crush their competitors by manipulating the system. That is not a free market. So it's true, we do not live in a fully free market right now. I would say, though, that the issues of deregulation, the campaign of removing red tape, of removing regulations, are actually pulling us out of, not further into, state capitalism. And I would say on that front, I do believe America is moving away from state capitalism, which we are already in. Now, on that side as well, I would also say in my take, just to sum it up, are we living under a system of state capitalism? Yes, to an extent. I think it's mixed, again, a mixed model economy. Does this need to be fixed? Absolutely. But do the issues they're giving example of foreign policies and diplomacy represent that? No, in my take. That said, everybody, Let's jump into some questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. First question, Martin McKenzie, you're saying, Washington, D.C. must never become a state. That would be a disaster and would undo the founders' concept of a stateless federal enclave without participation in electoral power. Yeah, I mean, again, the Democrats want it to be federalized. Or sorry, they want it to become a state. Republicans want it to be, well, I don't think it's Republicans. I think it's Trump. Republicans just wanted it to maintain as it was, right? Just a city. Trump moved the entire Overton window and said, no, let's federalize the whole place. It seems that's now happening. We'll see if it holds. The big argument is going to be twofold. Right now, the argument from the Democrats is saying that Trump's move is unjustified because the crime rate does not actually represent the amount of threat that he says it does, that would justify the deployment of the National Guard and the federalization of the D.C. Metro Police. Now, other people are noting something very important. They're noting that the Washington, D.C. police crime reporting system has kind of been cooking the books. It's not just there, it's actually in other parts of the country. The reported crime rate is not representative of the actual crime rate. Crime is actually a lot worse than what's being reported. I've covered that before. There's a lot of technicalities with it, and you have to kind of get into the weeds with it, so I won't dive too deep into that. But basically, there's loopholes in the way they can report crime, and there's different databases they can pull from. And so if you want to make crime look bad, you can pull from this database. If you want to make it look not that bad, you can pull from this one. And there's a whole partisan mix of how they talk about crime because of that. Science Chick 72, you're saying statistics are only as honest as the authority that reports them. Yeah. You know, it's something I know as a journalist. Look, and this is why you don't really see me doing this so much. If you want to prove or disprove anything, you can typically find something to back you up. If you want to claim that the sky is blue, I can find scientific reports and photographic evidence showing you the sky is blue. If I want to tell you the sky is yellow or black because it's nighttime, I can show you scientific reports and data and stuff that shows, no, the sky is black or yellow at sunset. An accurate representation would say this: the color of the sky changes to determine, this color of the sky changes by the time of day and depending on whether there are clouds or not. And so an accurate representation would say it's not one way or the other. There's different factors, and these are the different factors. My approach to journalism is to do that. I try to say, no, it changes. One side or the other is not right. Either absolute is incorrect. This is the actual picture of it. And that's what I try to do. But a lot of people, they try to say one side or the other, and that's how they try to represent things. I mean, that's kind of like maybe a funny analogy, but I'd say it actually does represent the way a lot of people report things, where they try to talk in absolutes and they don't really show you the full breadth of the picture. I really make an effort to show the whole picture. TZ Burton, you say, Josh, what is 2 plus 2? 4? No. What is 2 plus 2? 5. Correct, Winston. You're giving a 1984 reference, of course. Yeah, well, it's whatever Big Brother says it is, right? But I think you're referring to my joke about the little round peg not fitting in that square hole, where the guy that Washington Post interviewed is like, no, there's no problem of safety, but the person refuses to give their name because they're concerned about their safety. Like, there's no problem of safety, according to an unnamed source who could not speak publicly because they feared for their safety. Do they not get that? I can't figure it out. Like, if I were a journalist and I was like writing that article, that would make me pause for a minute and be like, something doesn't line up here. that this statement seems inherently contradictory, right? So there's a contradiction here. But some people, they don't, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's intentional or not. Some people can never face contradictions. They can accept two things that absolutely override each other, right? Two things that should cancel each other out, and they can accept both of them. It's safe, but the person cannot speak publicly because they're afraid for their safety. Again, round peg, square hole, doesn't quite work. Something doesn't line up here. Ashley from California, you're saying, I think we, U.S. citizens, need a lesson in crony capitalism. Yeah. Well, I've had debates on this even with libertarians. I probably align more on my economic views with libertarians. I don't make a secret of them. I'm very much in favor of Austrian economics. It's what I read into a lot. I think personally that Austrian economics are the most solid, economic theory. I do have some disagreements with libertarians when it comes to absolute free market principles, when it comes to global trade, though. And, I speak at Freedom Fest, several years now I've spoken there. Freedom Fest, of course, being one of the big libertarian conferences. And this is where I think, and it's not absolute. A lot of libertarians would agree with me on this. Some would disagree with me on this. And that's what I like about libertarianism. You actually have a lot of debate. My argument with crony capitalism is this. Some argue that trade barriers internationally represent crony capitalism, that state interventionism, when it comes to global trade, represents, again, socialist state interventionism. My disagreement is this, especially when it comes to China. Look, we can all agree, at least on the libertarian free market capitalist principles, but I think we could all agree that a free market is a good thing. And we could agree that interventionist policy is a bad thing. But if we allow a free market to be influenced by foreign state interventionism, then do we still have a free market? I would say the answer is no. Whether it's American state interventionism or foreign state interventionism, it is still state interventionism. And so a responsible government should prevent foreign state interventionism. And I would argue that a lot of the trade disputes, the foreign trade deals, even things, for example, like giving America most favored nation trade status on, again, like medications, that does not represent domestic state control on pricing, which would be state interventionism. What it is doing instead is preventing businesses from giving unbalanced trade preference to a foreign country and then making Americans pick up the tab, making us pay for the difference, right? In other words, it's allowing foreign countries to take advantage of the Americans by manipulating the free market. The problem we've had for a very long time in America is we've allowed this to go on for so long that our markets, the free market of the United States, is being finagled by just about every country on the face of the planet. Everybody is messing with our markets in some way or the other. How do you fix that? Again, because it does undermine the free market of America. And now, how do you fix that? Well, you fix it by putting tariffs in place, making new trade negotiations, putting up maybe even some barriers, maybe even sanctions or international trade barriers where they say if you can't make a balanced trade deal or stop messing with our markets, we're not going to do business with you. Now, does that represent a type of government policy that restricts the market? Yes, it does. But it's done to prevent state interventionism within our markets. That's my interpretation of this. And this has been one of my arguments on free market capitalism and my own views on international trade disputes, especially when it comes to China, because I think I'm probably best known for I'm like the anti-CCP guy, right? When people bring me to speak at events, I'm usually talking about that. let's be honest. I can talk about a lot of topics, but that's one of the most common things I speak about. And so, when I make arguments on that front, that's usually how I talk about it and how I defend the ideas of free market capitalism. The problem you have, though, is when you allow state interventionism from foreign countries too much, or when you allow monopolies to be established that get maybe state subsidies or regulations that allow them to dominate the market. A massive corporation represents just as much a threat to freedom as does a massive government. And if you go back to the early, I don't think you'd call it even conservative, the free market principle thinkers. If you go back to like the early writings of people who were against communism, for example, you would have people just as much opposed to monopoly, corporate monopoly, as you would to government monopoly. Because again, any kind of overarching system that undermined the freedom of the individual or the ability to compete of the individual represented just as much a threat to freedom. And that's how it was viewed, actually, for the most part. I'll give you an example. G.K. Chesterton, one of my favorite writers. Many of you probably know his essays. He's a very famous Christian writer. I really like his writings on economics. He had a magazine called G.K.'s Weekly, or it was a weekly newspaper, G.K.'s Weekly. I have a big booklet of clippings from it. I really enjoy it. But in his early writings, he was making arguments on this front, talking about the threats of Bolshevism before we even saw the threats of the Bolshevik Revolution. Again, the rise of the Soviet Union. He was talking about both the threats of that and of the threats of corporate monopoly, mixed model economies, effectively. And so I should restate this. I would say this is not an argument for conservatism. It's an argument for traditionalism, which I believe G.K. Chesterton represented, which if I were to call myself anything, I'd probably be considered more of a traditionalist, actually. Although I don't like to box myself in with labels. It's why I'm registered non-politically affiliated, right? Another question, Judy Akeem, you're saying, in our current system, as soon as anyone has enough money to start lobbying governments, the free market collapses into cronyism. Then the same policymakers who are being lobbied do not have it in their interest to legislate to protect the markets. Yeah, I know, it's really unfortunate. And that's one of the risks you face as you go down the road of crony capitalism. Cronyism pays people off, right? And as soon as you have it where the people who make the laws are getting financial interest, whether investments, whether kickbacks, whether they're making policies that benefit the thing that they're invested in, or they create legislation that benefits a business they or their family own, that's when you have cronyism. And when for example, imagine this, right? There's a national emergency, all right? Hypothetically speaking, imagine there's a national health crisis, and the government's saying, well, how do we deal with this national health crisis? I have an idea, says politician A. Let's mandate a medical treatment. Politician B says, well, geez, how do we mandate a medical treatment? Politician C says, I have an idea. How about we force the entire country to take a medical treatment? Politician A says, wow, fantastic idea. Here's an idea. Why don't we all buy stocks in the company that we're going to mandate this for? Great idea, says politician A, B, and C. They shake hands and they walk off into the sunset with bags of money. What happens then, right? Well, you have this. You have this, right? Well, what happens is they've now created a mandatory legislation that forces people to pay into something that will profit them. The business benefits from it, they benefit from it, the people suffer for it, but you could argue, it's for public health and public safety. And that's the way that cronyism often works. The other side is a big problem with the Chinese Communist Party right now. The Chinese Communist Party it even pays, right? American businesses lobby our government on behalf of the CCP. Normally, if you or I were to lobby the government on behalf of a foreign government and foreign interest, we would have to register as foreign agents. You'd be considered a foreign agent. But they're able to do this by proxy because, again, crony capitalism, cronyism. It's kind of this, right, as George Carlin would say, the late George Carlin comedian, it's one big club and you ain't in it, right? And that's what cronyism represents. Cronyism is that one big club that you ain't in. Have you seen the viral video? It's a joke. There's this like African, I don't know if he's like an activist or something like that. He goes, "We can all agree that we oppose corruption, but if I make money, then I will defend corruption." You know, unless I'm getting it, then I will defend corruption. Cronyism is a type of light corruption. But it's hard to undo it once it takes hold because effectively it creates a type of special interest where people, look, I may sound ignorant and maybe a little too innocent on this, but it didn't actually occur to me until, honestly, maybe 4 years ago, that most people act on personal interest. I know, surprise. I didn't actually understand this because I don't think like that. I don't really. I mean, look, I've worked for a nonprofit most of my life, right? Where I work at Epoch Times. Epoch Times is a nonprofit. My wanting to be here is not because I'm trying to get rich. You know what I mean? That's because I really believe in what it stands for. I believe in the value of independent news. I believe it's a necessary service. I disagree with the way that journalism has gone for the most part. I like that Epoch Times does a lot to stand for human rights. That's more what I stand for. And so for me, like, it's not really out of self-interest. But it's kind of been a big surprise to me to learn to what extent self-interest plays a role in decision making. And I feel like when I understood this, I had a bit of a culture shock, to be honest. Like, wow, geez, have I not seen this my entire life? I think there's degrees of it. It's not like everybody's acting out of greed, but it is true that when you bring self-interest into play, it has a big role. It has a very large influence over the parties involved. And not everybody's going to act out of some deeper, moral compass, which may sound funny. I thought most people acted under. Yeah, surprise, right? Took me until I was almost 40 years old to realize that. But if you understand the way that cronyism works, that's how a lot of it works. It's people do things out of self-interest. They may try to justify it in their minds, being like, well, it's for public safety or public health or equality or whatever else, and they're getting rich off of it. And they say, you know what, I'm making money by doing what's best for the people. And they make excuses for it. It's what they want, they let it happen, or whatever else. Cronyism, once it takes hold, is very hard to overturn because overturning it means you have to strip away some of that special interest. There are parties involved in cronyism who make a lot of money on it. And if you want to change it, you have to basically, like pry it from their hands, you know what I mean? Like, you got to like pry it from their hands, and they don't want to let it go. And so that's the problem of undoing cronyism. I do hope America returns to a true free market capitalist society. I do believe that free market capitalism true free market capitalism does represent the most beneficial, the most prosperous, and the most enjoyable form of a free market, the most enjoyable form of a market. I would also argue that many people who say otherwise, almost all of their criticisms, if you break it down, the things they criticize are various forms of state interventionism. a point that Ludwig von Mises also made in his book, Planned Chaos. It's the big irony, the real ironic part about a lot of people who believe in socialism. The criticisms they have of capitalism almost all the time are not about true free market capitalism. The criticisms they have of capitalism are the results of socialist state interventionism within the free market. It is that has broken the system. It is that causes a lot of the problems, and it is that has unfortunately taken hold for a very long time and is frankly causing a lot of the problems we're now living under. Problems I do believe are getting fixed, problems I do believe are gradually falling off to the wayside, but problems that the beneficiaries do not want to let go of. And we'll see what happens, right? All right, everyone, that said, thank you so much for being here. Let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe that foreign trade negotiations, foreign policies that restrict absolute free markets, globally, do you believe that this is, do you believe that's crony capitalism? Do you believe that that is state interventionism? Do you believe that if a foreign country puts tariffs on the United States, that we are wrong if we intervene in it? That we should not have intervention on our side, even if other countries on their side do it? If you believe that, how should we address that? What is the way to ensure a free market system when we're living in a free market being manipulated by foreign actors? How should we deal with this as a country? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. That said, join me tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for another great discussion and the wild, wild world of news. I will see you then. In the meantime, please don't forget to hit the like button. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.